The stories contained in this podcast are the recollections of the guests we've invited onto the show. We are an outlet for people to share their truths, and we accept no legal responsibilities for the stories contained herein.
I'm Kendra Sheets.
And I'm Rich Gill.
And this is Enough, a podcast that aims to shine light into the darkened corners of the music industry while discussing the ways we can and should improve ourselves and, in turn, our community.
Welcome to another episode of the Enough podcast. Today we have our guest, Oliver Books, on. Oliver, if you could give us a little introduction about you, who you are, what music means to you, and kind of how you got involved in what you do.
Hey, yeah, my name is Oliver Books. I am a musician living in Rochester, Minnesota. I do a bunch of audio work. Right now, my main gig is dialogue production for film, podcast, and audiobooks. I grew up around music. My dad was in a band called the Booker Mini Band, which was like a regional act that was pretty popular in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Introduced to folk music at a pretty young age, really resonated with that. I don't know, it just was the thing that helped me to connect to people. The story that I tell on stage a lot is my dad and I wouldn't have conversations when I was an angsty teenager, but he would show up at my door a couple nights a week with two guitars, and we'd just play music together. That was the kind of way that we bonded. I'll be honest, I tried to do a whole bunch of different things with my life that weren't music, and there's something in who I am that music and sound is just where I will land every time. I tried to be a video game designer. That didn't work. I tried to be a miner, like with a pickaxe in California. That was a crazy summer, but it didn't work. Just every and anything, and I don't know. I love music. Music keeps me coming back, and yeah, that's what got me to where I am today, and I just say yes to stuff.
I love that I was a minor, and then the follow-up to that is just, yeah, that was a crazy summer.
Oh, I should say this because this is an important part of my journey. I am a person in recovery, sustained recovery. I stopped using illicit substances in 2014. The mining summer happened in 2012, and
Sure.
Oh boy,
Okay.
You find the only
Yeah.
toothless guy on the mountain, and hit it off.
So one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk to you on here is because you had a podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was hired by an organization called Faces and Voices of Recovery. Their HQ is in Washington, D.C., and that was in, when did they hire me? 2022? And yeah, it was a really great experience. They are a phenomenal organization working amidst many phenomenal organizations in the peer recovery support field. And what that means is, at large, people get thrown into 28-day treatment centers and are taken out and kind of just patted on the butt and said, here's life, good luck. Not dissimilar ways to like incarceration.
I was
and often
just going to mention that.
Right. I'm working on a film right now that's about pregnant women who are incarcerated with my friend Marcy Marie, who has a TikTok following. We'll get to that. Yeah, so work for Faces and Voices of Recovery, and one of the first things I kind of picked up on is that they were trying to relaunch this podcast that kind of had sputtered and died. I had a very short-lived podcast with my friend as a pandemic project called Content with Content, where we would review internet influencers and mostly video gamers and leftist political thinkers, because that's my niche, I guess. And I was like, hey, I love content. I love sound. I'm very good at dialogue editing. And so they brought me on, and then the host producer for the first handful of episodes quit. And the original host, who was the other host, also quit. So there's like 6 episodes of them kind of taking the reins. And then it wasn't a large organization, Faces and Voices. We ballooned up to about 30 people. And they were like, well, we like this. Here you go. And then I just started talking to people. And, they had a great network. I have a pretty substantial network. I was able to interview directors. There's a director named Colin Askey from Love in the Time of Fentanyl, which is a PBS documentary. I interviewed Chris Tate, who is the keyboard player for a band called The Electric Six. And then Dr. Corey Vilsant, who is a Harvard educator, and Patrick Kennedy, RFK's cousin. It got kind of wild. And so, yeah, I did that for a couple of years. And then the Trump administration took office, and, well, it just wasn't a great time to be most of our contracts were with state organizations. Once those states realized that they would probably not have a lot of funding coming in, several of our contracts were curtailed, and I was part of a second or third round of layoffs. So that's where I'm at now.
What you were doing with that podcast, what we're doing with this podcast, there's definitely some crossover. Lots of people who have trauma develop addictions. Lots of people who are in recovery have been in situations where they've been victimized or assaulted. It all kind of ties together. Can you talk a little bit about sort of like what you were saying, like the intersectionality of that and what sort of you've seen in your recovery journey when it comes to that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to start with a big part of the recovery movement, and I think you two seem like you're on the front end of this exact thing, is the way that we talk about it. In, probably 2014, 15-ish, there was a movie called The Anonymous People that came out, and it started asking the question, like, what if we as recovering people identified ourselves as people in recovery versus addict, alcoholic, all this stuff.
The importance of language.
Right,
Okay.
right. And I think, not to get too in the weeds about it, but especially with things as important to talk about as assault and the prevalence of assault in both the music industry and substance use circles, I think the opposite is almost true for abuse. It seems like everyone's so worried about what the algorithm is going to say that you can't just say sexual assault. You have to like make some sort of like weird algorithm dodging. So I appreciate what you guys are doing there. As far as how I've interfaced with survivors of assault, I will say that that has not been my experience. I've not experienced sexual assault. However, many people that I love and are in the recovery sphere have used peer support groups as a way of processing, not necessarily like in a group setting, but whether it's just like finding a group of people that you trust with your life.
Both of these intersecting features were things that we didn't openly talk about, like the uncle who drinks too much, who goes away for a while. You know, now you're like, oh, this person's in recovery, or this person went to a rehab facility, or this person's in a support group, 12-step program, whatever it might be. It ties in with mental health. Same thing with the sexual abuse and assault. Being able to pick your language. Am I a survivor? Am I a victim? You know, how do I want to be seen here? Is really important in empowering the person that's involved in this. The same thing seems to be true with recovery. You mentioned substance use. I didn't know until like a year and a half ago that it shouldn't be called substance abuse, because the terminology of using abuse versus use actually can be like a degrading factor on the person who's dealing with the addictive problems. So language, unfortunately, at least in English in most of the world, but I definitely in America, labeling things is really important. And sometimes I think we go a little overboard with it, but there's also been a lot of proof that the way that you label certain things changes your mental structure on how you view yourself or those things. So we have to kind of think about that as we move forward. And it seems like, you know, any sort of therapy and anything tied into mental health, which both of these things are intrinsically tied into, are kind of moving forward through society in the same way. We're becoming more open. We're talking about mental health more, and all of these things are now, you know, coming to the forefront while we're doing so.
Absolutely, absolutely. And unfortunately is also being weaponized in things like calling an entire group of people illegals. Like you said, there's so much evidence that how we talk about stuff makes major systemic change. I mean, to the point of the folks involved in the most recent California uprising, like, the challenge isn't finding out what's supposed to be said. It's just getting eyes on it. Language that we base in empathy and kindness is going to help people grow into the best versions of themselves. There's a saying in some recovery circles, and I don't believe this all the way, but I think it's kind of a funny starting point, and that's we're all about as unique as crabgrass. And I'm a millennial, so like everyone is their own unique special flower. And also like I'm a millennial who's politically activated, so like also like let's look at societal stuff. But I think that there's just people evolving and finding new ways to express themselves, especially in music.
No one group is above what you see in an encompassed society, right? So you're going to have the same type of cast of characters. You're going to have the capitalist, you're going to have the teens that are trying to find themselves, you're going to have the this is not how it was in my day kind of elder version, and you're also going to have people who are struggling with their, mental health, their physical health, and they're going to, to use another phrase from recovery, hurt people, right? So you have people there that are using or overusing substances, sometimes completely sober, actively imparting their will on other people that may not consent to those actions. And you see that in every single group. It's not, one. I mean, I don't know about classical music. I think it'd be weird if that's how that functions.
There's also people who maybe are not using or abusing substances and taking advantage of the people who are.
Oh, yes, definitely.
In the same way. Oliver, I know you coming from sort of like the folk sort of like...
A lot of time in the old hippie community.
Yeah, the like similarities between the punk rock scene that Kendra and I came out of and that scene is when it comes to substance use and assault, like it's so similar.
I always thought it was funny that the punks and the hippies like had such a antithesis kind of thing going on, because I was like, at the core, like a lot of this is really similar, but again, tonally it's coming out very different, but the ideas are all there, the drug use is there, and the really bad white people dancing is still there. So
so prevalent.
Yeah.
At least yours is like, I don't know, it feels like aggressive and it matches the music. The hippie stuff is
I don't know, man. Have you ever seen some like 20-year-old dude for no reason just start punching the ground at a venue? Like a concrete floor?
Punk is super like anti-authoritarian, anti-hierarchical bullshit, and the hippie stuff is all about like freedom and peace and love and kindness. But to be like peace and love, man, like violence, no war, and then like buy a key from like someone who is in the cartel, like it doesn't line up for me. And I don't know, I think like there's a lot of that cognitive dissonance. I'm sorry for just like keep dragging it back to politics, but it's just
go.
Well, it's there. I mean, music in general is political by nature.
Yeah, well, and both of those scenes are highly political at their core, highly political genres of music.
Right. They both started to protest against what was happening as in a political system. And I mean, different times, different places maybe, but like the cognitive dissonance, I think, is what drove me away from that scene. Even in recovery, I spent a couple of years going back and playing fests and stuff. I think there are so many really great people that I've met through that community. But then there's a bunch of people who I thought were great, and then now they just do stuff to make other people angry. But then that makes me think back to kind of the point of this podcast, like that cognitive dissonance has to exist in anybody who's willing to take ownership of another person's consent. Like I get to decide what your body is for. Like that level of cognitive dissonance is, I don't understand it. It feels mental health adjacent, but I also don't want to let someone who is capable of that decision off the hook with a diagnosis.
The more that, we're talking openly about consent as an actual thing, like Rich and I have talked about it before as an episode, we weren't taught consent. There was no class talking to you about consent. When you learned sex ed, they didn't tell you about consent. What was that? But now that we're talking about it so much more in the mainstream, I don't know that we're getting away with some of those things. Like before, it was kind of easier to slip into, like, oh, well, it's a lot of the reasons why I think the conversation exists of a certain age group going like, well, was that consent? Did I consent to that?
I think the heartening thing, at least from my perspective, and maybe this is just anecdotal and because of the communities that I choose to participate in, this musician who was like headlining festivals, touring the world with like Michael Franti and stuff, all of a sudden there started to be like some rumors. And then some people who I like trust were like, no, man, he's really wild out there. It's not okay. And so I think like in a sort of like, because I got into the recovery thing and I wasn't as involved in those communities I wasn't paying as close attention. Because like before, he'd just be like wandering on the festival grounds, and you'd say hey, and then rumors start circling around his behavior, and then he's gone from the scene for a while, and then all of a sudden he pops up headlining this festival. And like I said, the heartening thing is every single one of the bands full of people that I know, like the day of that announcement, dropped out of that festival. And I think that's great. I hope it's like a twofold thing. Like, I really hope that they didn't drop out because, oh, peer pressure, I want to do this for my brand, I want to blah, 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 blah. It's a business decision versus like, no, like I can't support a group of people who are willing to hire a predator to be the face of their event. I don't know. And I would like to think that it's more the latter, but
especially if it's something that on its surface is promoting holistic healing and togetherness and community and safety for women and things like that, to just like spit in the face of all that and book someone who multiple people have stories about and multiple people have told them about it.
Yeah. Also, something that feels just as gross is how unsurprising it is for people to just say fuck it. Harvey Weinstein got away with it for how long?
Look at Brand New.
Right.
Yeah.
Sold out arenas all across the country.
There's no end to the grossness of people, but also there's a lot of I just think like the fact that people are trying to make things better is really good. I watch John and Hank Green a lot. They are two of my favorite YouTubers. I also just watch too much YouTube in general, but that's the one charity that I, when I can, and that's just where the money goes is their stuff. But their main achievement has been that they have helped raise $40 million to put together a maternal center of, oh gosh, I'm not going to say the title of it right, but it's in Sierra Leone. It's a maternal center for excellence. It's a teaching hospital. Sierra Leone had the highest death rate for women giving birth. This has drastically already created just safer places to be a pregnant person. Like I said, real world impact. And now they're moving along to, they do a lot with like global public health because, activism isn't just posting on your Facebook like, hey, this guy's mean, whatever. It's,
let me put a flag on top of my photo.
Yeah.
I think if that's where you start, that's wonderful. But like, you can literally call everybody that is in Congress because they all work for you. And it's not hard. They're really receptive. They want to hear from you. Well, most of them. There's Brad Finstead, and we don't like him. But I don't work for a nonprofit anymore. I don't care.
We had a guest on, and I think about this all the time. She mentioned once that basically what you see in your music community is basically just a reflection of what's going on in society, no matter how alternative or far removed or, leftist, liberal, far out there thinking your community might be. You see all of the same pros and cons that you see in a large scale society. And it's really true.
There's that example of if you're at a bar and there's a Nazi hanging out there and the bartender's like, yeah, he's a Nazi, but he's a nice guy. So we don't, there's only one, so we don't kick him out. Well, enough of those nice guys show up, all of a sudden your bar has become a Nazi bar.
I think all the way back to like, let's activate our communities, right? Like the big takeaway for me, figuring out what you as a human being believe in, what your values are, because I think it has to start there. If it's a trend or if it's what people are telling you to believe, you're never going to stick to it. I think even all the way back to like the beginning of our conversation, like that level of self-worth has to come from a level of values inside. I have a good friend that says, if you want self-esteem, do esteemable things. Well, what does that mean to you? And in my time growing up over the past 10 years, because, I feel like recovery has been me figuring out what adulthood looks like. And it's been very much like this group of people, or they're holding some sort of like feeling, or they're taking these actions that give me that ick. Well, what am I going to do about it? Well, my last therapist probably would say something about stoicism and how you can't do anything about it right this second. But like maybe I can right this second by encouraging your listeners and everyone to just make sure that this stuff is talked about, that you talk about the sexual assault, that we can talk about recovery, and we don't have to stigmatize survivors or people in recovery, and that we do stigmatize fucking Nazis. Fuck those guys. And then also the just like talking about all of this stuff, making it okay to talk about this stuff, because the other side is weaponizing it. Whoever the other side is to you, I guess. But I'm thinking specifically about the people who made it just very yesterday in my hometown, small town, 3,000, 5,000 people. I grew up in a little itty bitty farm community. Over the last couple of years, they've like put together an arts program, and I've been really impressed by how forward thinking I thought them to be. And then someone who was like a couple years older than me in high school was like, well, they just tore down our flagpole because it had a pride flag on it and ripped it up and burned it in front of our house. I don't know who they is. They don't either. But the bottom line is the people who have been saying illegals and woke for the past decade now, they're normalizing violent language, which is leading to violent rhetoric, which is leading to violence against our queer friends, our friends of color, our undocumented friends. This is our community. Bottom line is our communities are under attack right now. And for me to sit on my ass and do nothing as a straight passing cis white man, you can't fucking do that. And I think there is a level of privilege that comes with the acknowledgement of all of the stuff that I just said. But at the same time, it is baffling to me that that we're not all so much more activated coming from backgrounds like we have come from. Like the folk music that I grew up listening to, all of those people were anti-war. They were nonviolent, peaceful protesters. Some of them less peaceful. Some of them did some stuff. And there's that in every rhetoric of any sort of like cool music. I think the only thing that is a little bit more vanilla is pop music. But even that, like, fucking Taylor Swift said some stuff. Like,
I mean, it's undeniable that the artist has a platform. They literally perform on a stage unless you're in a basement. At least they're at the front of the room. And if you are warranted that type of attention, you're able to use that microphone to start speaking about some of these things instead of going through the same old bullshit of like, fuck your parents, the government sucks. Like, why does the government suck? Like,
yes.
Talk about why. Like, how people can be properly using their platforms where, you know, let's talk about deporting people without due process. Let's talk about sexual assault and abuse. Let's talk about mental health and recovery. Like, use those platforms while you have them, not just to get yourself 3 free drink tickets and like some girl's phone number. Like, do something good with it when you have that, because that's how you're going to be able to build a community. Otherwise, you just have a bunch of like antisocial weirdos hanging out in a dark room, which is cool in itself in a way. But like at a certain point, you're no longer in your like early 20s. You're thinking like, what are we doing here? What is the point of any of this thing that I've been working on for so long in some way?
Well, and to bring it back to pop music for a second,
Rich is not going to let that go. I knew you were not going to let that go.
It may not be that, and even if, you know, the lyrics are not as explicitly so, a lot of that stuff with like Sabrina Carpenter or Demi Lovato, Taylor Swift, Kesha, obviously, it's all about like self-empowerment. I mean, ostensibly pop music is music made for teenage girls. So they listen to enough of those songs. Shit, man, I listen to Kesha Woman and I'm like, fuck yeah, I'm a motherfucking woman. Like,
yeah, that song rules.
Like, that song is awesome.
I would probably object to Kesha being made for little girls, especially since all of her new songs are about like wearing leather and getting fucked like really hard. So...
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I mean, I brought this up before.
That's my girl.
Her entire tour is sponsored by the Kink dating app.
Yeah. And Pet Rescue.
And Pet Rescue.
Let's go.
Yeah. She rules. Anyway.
But maybe Kesha notwithstanding, the rest of those artists, yeah, it's all just about empowerment and like just happy with yourself and not taking shit from anyone, you know? And you get enough people listening to those songs, enough artists, especially young artists, doing that, that can like mobilize. I mean, shit, Taylor Swift mobilized how many people in the last election? I mean, it didn't ultimately work.
Oh
but,
yeah, because
you know,
all the white boys stayed home.
yeah.
Well, I think the thing is that when you know, with music, with anything that's underground, that's, you know, smaller, community based, bunch of people in a room, that's where it starts, right? Like you make the large changes, the large scale changes start there, and then they actually trickle up, question mark. Because once you have, like, you know, a Taylor Swift or a Kesha or a Demi Lovato like saying these things, while many of them write their own lyrics, some of the things can't be greenlit because the studio says, right? But if you're seeing that the culture is shifting in a way where young women are absorbing and want to continue absorbing messages of female empowerment, you know, you're going to see that cultural shift because the smaller communities are kind of like setting the tone. So when then they start writing these lyrics about empowerment and, you know, mental health and physical health and no shaming and stigmas, then that kind of feeds into everyone in between the two. And that's, I think, when you have the full-on like societal shift in the way that we talk and think about things differently.
Yeah, I think it's super, super important to acknowledge that like pop culture and celebrity drives culture. And I think that there's a level of complacency that we get where, like, as people who are involved in like smaller, more niche music scenes, like I don't listen to pop music at all, but
good for you. You're doing a good thing with your life.
I don't know. I feel like I should. I feel like some of it's probably good. I don't know.
A lot of it's garbage.
Yeah.
So is a lot of everything. I don't know.
Like, yeah, I was gonna say, like, most music.
30
As we just
million
talk
minutes
about,
of music.
like,
Yeah.
all these like uplifting
Yeah. Right.
artists and stuff. It's like, yeah, most of it's trash. So whatever.
No, but I think there's a level of, because you were talking about all this like change making, fairly subversive, like the Sabrina Carpenter album cover is super subversive for right now.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking about like how like trad life is still trending super hard, and it's probably the internet. It is the internet's fault, but the super hard division between like what clearly I think I could speak for the three of us, where we want to see some progress happening in the world, and for people to be able to live into the lives that they were hopefully meant to, want to, etc. But I don't want to be pessimistic, but I do acknowledge that like there is always going to be an opposite to that. And I'm not a person that deletes Facebook friends unless it's like, ooh. And even then, I try to keep a few of them around just to see what's going on. To see that level of like just what I would consider spite and hatred. And for them, I assume it's protection and strength. And just for it all to kind of fight together, I am grateful that music seems like as a whole to be guiding towards a certain direction, pop country notwithstanding. But I also think that there's a level of like, well, the people that are going to hate this, I don't know. I don't know if music's the thing that's going to change them. I think music to me has always been more than just flip on the radio, have some background noise. Like it means a lot to me. I think part of that is from like the folk tradition because it's so story based. I think that's why hip hop is so important. But, you know, the guy's singing about dirt roads and hanging a flag on the back of my pickup truck. I drive a pickup truck too. I don't know. It's not great.
No flag though.
No flag. No. I had a bumper sticker that said "This man ate my son," and it was a picture of Ted Cruz.
Seen it.
Yeah. So that was good. But yeah, I think like if music is the thing that drives you to want the best for your community, for your society, for your culture, like use that as a springboard.
Music doesn't even have to be like the main thing that brings people together, but you know, 15 years ago I didn't know Kendra. 3 years ago I didn't know Oliver, but somehow we all made it together because, like, yeah, music may or may not have been the catalyst, but it's like you will find people who sort of have your same values, are working towards the same thing, that you are. There's an Ian MacKaye quote, it's not a mistake that all these people end up in the room together because they're all working towards something bigger.
And that's a huge thing with like support groups, right? Like in recovery or just in general, like in forming a community is, for example, like I lead support groups now for my school, for practicum, my field study. And we have a group of people that comes together that shares one thing in common, and that is it. And they come from all different areas of Chicagoland. They're out in the burbs. They're straight downtown. They're down on the south side, west side, north side, like all over the place. Some of them don't even live in the state at this point. And they have nothing in common. I mean, maybe a few things, but like they don't know each other outside of this. And by the time they finish or they kind of move through the program, they're friends. Like they're friends that meet 2 times a week for this time, and they talk and they share, and they realize that you have more in common with someone, even if they're from a completely different lifestyle than you are, then you actually have differences. And that's kind of where all of this is going, right? Like if we're talking about music as a small scale versus, a small model of society versus what's going on in politics today, with everything. Like everyone wants you to believe that you're so different, right? Hippies are different. They're a one-off. Punks are different. They're different than everyone else. No, man, like we're literally all the same. And I don't know a lot of people, even the pop country fanatics, if you went up to them and you're like, hey, wouldn't you want these things for your community? I mean, most humans have the same things that they want in life. They want safety, security. They want some sort of support from the people around them. I don't know anyone that's like, nah, fuck support. I don't need that. But when you get these people together and like it's the way that are, at least in the US, I'm assuming other places as well, has been set up, which is basically to other everyone else all the time. And you are a lone wolf with your crew of people, and no one is like you, and no one knows what you're going through. And it is so fucking lonely to live that lifestyle, whether it's you're feeding into the kind of punk mantra of we're better and different than everyone because we're this like outside group that knows more because we're political, but half of them don't even understand what happened in history like 10 years ago. It's so lonely. And then you get in with a group like, I don't know you, Oliver. I just met you. And like you and I have had a fabulous conversation this evening. And we don't have that much in common. Maybe we do. I don't know. Like we're here for a purpose. It's the same thing with a support group. It's the same thing as when you get people together in general. Most people share more similarities than they have differences. And we're unfortunately taught to believe the opposite, which is what keeps us apart, which is what keeps us, I think, from growing, as rapidly as we should be to absolve some of these things back into our value system as a society.
So I recently-ish watched a speech presentation thing with a trans woman preacher. She was talking about her experience, which in a religious context has not been great. It also hasn't been the worst. I remember a pretty poignant moment where she walked up to 2 older white men in suits and said, everyone has stuff in common. Do you have a child in your life? Grandson, niece, nephew, whatever. He's like, well, yeah, I've got kids and I've got a couple grandkids and I love them dearly. What are their names? That mixed with like, where do you live? What do you love about it? Why do you live there? And I think right there, those are 2 things that everyone can connect on. I think that power of just like living a human experience. Again, I know that there are massive divides that we have to overcome, and I don't think that there are. I don't want to just like say be nice to everyone, right? That's not the answer.
Uh-huh.
But
it's a starting point.
Unless they're an abuser.
Yeah.
Then you know what I mean? Like, so I do think that there's common sense levels to this. But yeah, I try to assume the best in people, try to connect. But with that connection, I think specifically we've been talking a lot about action, and I think that's the thing that's going to actually make change. We live in a really tumultuous social time, and I think that without, I don't know, oversimplifying, if we're not doing things in our small communities, like you said earlier, it has to trickle up. Trickle down has never worked, will never work.
One of the things that we see, we the public, but Rich and I talk about a lot, is when members of bands or artists come forward and they actually attempt to take some accountability for their actions, it's usually what we like to joke about is like the Mad Libs form, which is like this very generic boilerplate template. They all look very similar. They all share the same characteristics. And then there's just kind of like fill in the blanks. And there's a lot of, oh, I have problems with drugs and alcohol. I'm coming to terms with my poor mental health. That's why I did the things I did. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on that being kind of a tried and true, I don't want to say get out of jail free card, but that's exactly kind of what I want to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly what they're trying to do. After having been in recovery and participating in that community for a decade, I'll be honest, words don't mean a damn thing. A single speech doesn't mean anything. I'm the kind of guy who would steal your wallet and help you look for it. Like, I mean, that's who I was when I was using.
That's a lot of addicts, though.
Right. And that's the thing. And, you know, I've done a number of things that I'm really, in hindsight, I'm pretty devastated by. And I've done actions in sobriety that, again, I am so not proud of. I'm hopefully growing all of the time, but I think it goes back to that question of values and action. When someone enters recovery, there's a level of, well, how aren't you going to do that again? That I like to ask people. And honestly, this is more unique to recovery, but like, how broken are you? Because for me to change, I had to be completely separated from any semblance of an idea that I could figure this thing out. I'm sure that there are people who have met me in my time on this earth that have nothing but bad things that they think about me, that don't like who I am as a person, and I will never be able to redeem myself in their eyes, and that's okay. But I think for me to be okay with me knowing that, I know some people that call it living amends. There are people who I'm sure never want to see me again, and I would never force myself to be in a situation where they are required to. I don't want to insert myself to say I'm sorry or something. That's insane. But I do think that as long as I can live a life that is led by kindness, empathy, trying to help my fellow people, that's helped ground me in a sense of my values, and it's helped me develop those values. So I think the sticky part for me comes in that sort of, because I don't have personal experience in assault, but I do know people who have done that. And because it's separated from me as a person, I don't know what the most empathetic way to approach that is, other than I know the methodology I used to recover from substance use disorder, and I know how to share that. And I can't forgive anyone for what they have done in the past, but I hopefully can put myself into a position where I can shine lights on what can be done going forward. I know that it's a really heavy topic. I think I've sponsored people that have been abusers. I've sponsored people that have killed people. And in a mentor role, I guess it's not my job to find forgiveness for that person. But I do think that people can always be better. Every single person can always be better. The survivors have to hold on to their whatever pushes them forward too. I think that's probably more important than how we treat the abusers, how we help lift up people. It's a challenging topic to talk about, I think, because I don't necessarily know that I've ever been taught the right way to talk about it.
None of us have been taught the right way to do anything when it comes to most of this, and we're learning as we go.
Yeah. So, I don't know, bottom line, be nice to people, be kind. Be excellent to each other and party on, dude.
So, we talk a lot about like restorative and transformative justice, and we want to be forgiven as people. We say, oh, everyone's human, everyone makes mistakes, we're all learning. And all of that's true. And I think, as you had kind of mentioned, one of the things that must be noted is that whether it's recovery or abuse or assault or just being a person, you've come into contact with people and you've had engagements with them where they may never forget and they may never forgive you. And part of your journey in trying to heal is just coming to terms with the fact that, like, you can offer up so much to that person and then you need to walk away because they don't owe you anything in return. You don't need to keep trying to show them that you're a good person because that's no longer for them. That's for you. And this is not about you. Should be about the person that's been injured in some way, whether you were cognizant of it or not. And we do want the people who are, being accountable for their actions, that are trying to grow to their best possible capability. But when statements like this get, issued saying, I'm in recovery and, I had all of these things happen in my life and I turned to drugs or the bottle or whatever it is, things are going to be better now. This kind of like, not really, I'm sorry, but here's the reason why I acted the way I did kind of verbiage that gets put out there on either a screenshot of the Notes app or a long Facebook post. The thing that usually, as you kind of mentioned, gets swept under the rug is like, what about the people you hurt, though? They need empowerment. While you're seeking this attention or feel like you need to make some sort of public statement, which in today's society, I'm not going to argue is the incorrect thing to do, especially when you're in some sort of public-facing position. But like, what about all the people that came forward and are now basically being negated because you're giving a reason why it's okay for you to have acted like a dick back in 2004? Like, we need to spend time making sure that those people have the resources that they need to heal to the best of their ability.
Yeah, it's not about the abuser. You're probably right. There's probably like some sort of statement piece that has to happen, but God, every time I read one of them, it's just disgusting.
Yeah, there's never been a good one.
No.
Yeah, what no one seems to understand is I'm sorry for this. I did this because it's like, no. Just stop. Apologize for what you were doing. Find a way to make amends personally. The amends doesn't have to happen publicly.
No.
Which always seems to be the part that's missing.
It would be like in like the 12-step program if you were like, hey, and then you tagged all the people that you've ever like done something to on your Facebook post and was like, so I was one of these 5 things to you. We cool?
Yeah,
like
cool.
That makes no sense. Why would you do that? And then you wait for them to comment as a response, and you're like, sick, I'll cross that one off the list. He's cool with me now. Like, what?
Just thumbs up if we're cool.
One thumbs up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Angry face emoji. Oh, I guess I better reach out.
Yeah. And, we had this really amazing guest, and they made this comment, and I use this in a lot of my groups when we talk about people being human and fucking up and, substance use and fucking up and whatever. But they said this really beautiful thing. And I never thought about life this way until they mentioned this. And I was like, that's exactly what I believe now. Like, I think this is right. And which is, they said, people aren't good or bad. People consistently make good or bad choices. And at any moment, you could be making bad choices where you're seen publicly, then you're deemed as, this tagged as a bad person or, problematic or whatever, because the choices you're making are kind of leading you in one way. But at any moment where you're given a choice, you can make it different and start to change the direction that you're going. And as a person who has control issues, I very much appreciate that, because that means that you basically have control, in theory, over how you're seen by other people, by how your day is going to go in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways, how your mental state is going to be. Because if you're making these negative choices for yourself, you're usually in a pretty bad way. But if you basically take a moment, stop, and you think, what is the best decision for me, people around me, any of that, you can completely do a 180 and change the course of how that day or your week or whatever is going.
Absolutely. And as someone in recovery, I would add to that, you don't have to make any of those choices alone. I think that I'm fortunate and privileged to be in circles where I know several people who have my best interest at heart, but I know when I walked into the dope house or whatever, it's not necessarily I don't know that I was able to make, I can't tell you how many times I'm like, oh, I'm never doing that again. And then I'd be and then I'd walk downstairs and my dealer lived in the fourplex unit below me. It was like, hey man, I got that stuff you like. I guess I'm doing that again.
Yeah, the I'm not doing that again is like the last year and a half of me drinking, where I was just like, I'm never doing this again. And I'm like, oh, maybe,
Maybe one more time.
okay.
Only one more time.
And then I wake up and I'm like, oh God, I'm never up. Cycle continues. And then eventually you hit to that point where you're like, I'm actually never going to do that again. Sick.
Yeah.
Okay.
How broken do you have to get? Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are studies that say 75% of people recover, and that's crazy. And it's not just going through 12-step treatments and stuff. It's like natural recovery. Some people do have problematic drinking and they just slow down. Everything exists on a spectrum. And yeah, I appreciate the idea that we have a little bit of control. I don't know that works great for me when I'm in my mental health kind of spirals, which happen 2 or 3 times a year. But I know that the people who love and care about me can help me make those choices.
See, if I don't have the control, then I go into a mental health spiral. So, or that false sense of control.
Sure,
it literally spawns like a bad place inside of me. We're working on that in therapy, though. I'm a few years in.
We love that. We love that. When I was about 2 years into recovery, maybe this is an ego thing, but I really wanted to make a music festival happen. And I happened to be in contact with a couple of guys who were in bands and stuff, who were doing quite well. Small aside, I've been in bands my whole life. None of them have ever taken off, done anything. And I'm okay with that because I don't know, I just love making music and I can't do anything else. But these guys were in bands that were like kind of becoming popular. And I was like, I love going to festivals. I had a ton of experience in it, and getting popular is maybe an overstatement, but regionally successful, whatever. So we got together every weekend. We'd go grab coffee Sunday afternoon and just kind of put our heads together on how do we make this festival happen. We wanted to make sure that it was all local bands and it was really a community event. And the crux of the whole festival was we are going to make this a charity event. And when we started, we didn't really know a ton of people who were in charge of nonprofits. I think I was like 23, 24. And we ended up meeting someone named Stephanie who ran a company called Mission 21. And it was a shelter for underage girls that had been trafficked. And meeting them, and we never met any of the girls who were in their care, which wanted that to be the case. We didn't want to involve their privacy, just like try to keep it as a 100 as possible. But yeah, Stephanie and Tori and Shauna, and they ran this organization, and to see these incredible women working so hard to help give these young girls like a chance and a community, it was incredibly inspiring. And so we were like, let's make a music festival around this. Like, let's do it, And again, we were all in our early 20s and scrappy and vagabond-esque. It's a metal band, a rock band, and me who was a recovering hippie, I guess. And so we held this event called Foster Fest, and we got like some pretty decent community traction. None of us had any community organizing experience other than like throwing shows at like Kathy's, which is like the local dive bar. And we watched 3,000 people come to this event throughout the 12 hours that it was put on. And we raised $10,000 for this organization. And I think that moment was maybe the most crystal clear sign that I've ever had in my life that people basically want to help, or at least enough of them to make an actual difference. And I think maybe a little guidance is helpful to show people where and how to act. Like you said, none of us are given a guidebook. Hell, none of us were ever told what consent was. But I think hopefully most people generally want to be good. And to see this festival, which pandemic killed it, of course, but to see that our small community come together, and like Rochester's maybe liberal, it's a pretty purple town. And like, this is 3 people who have no experience doing any of this. Any single one of us can do whatever we want to while we're here. So like, do cool stuff.
Enough is a podcast centering on surviving abuse, harassment, and assault in the music scene.
To help get the word out, please like and subscribe and share with your friends. In 2025, we are interested in talking to teachers, authors, artists, activists, counselors, community organizers, and anyone else who is dedicated to making a positive impact in their music community and our society as a whole. If that sounds like you, please reach out to us at thisisenoughpodcast@gmail.com.